And because of the FOMO building and the excitement around it, we're seeing others reach out. And now we officially have 10 states that are looking into copying what happened in Pennsylvania to introduce strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation, but it doesn't stop there. We have 4 state lawmakers, I should say 4 international lawmakers across the world who are also interested in moving forward. And this is just the beginning. I mean, we've been in this thing since the end of the election, right? So November 5th is when the excitement started to really take off. And we're seeing so much FOMO build, so much excitement build around this type of legislation. And we think there's going to be even more federal officials, state officials, and also international lawmakers who are going to get on board with Bitcoin.
Massive. I want to come back to the international FOMO in a moment.
We are seeing a significant amount of movement across the country, not just on the right, but also on the left. And we will be the first in the country to introduce legislation in a Democrat trifecta state with a Democrat introducing it in 2025.
Okay, so we're live here in El Salvador with the man who actually agreed to do my first ever interview back in 2021 when my accent was even worse and I had no followers online. Dennis Porter,
hey,
welcome.
Good to see you, brother. Absolutely.
Incredible to see you
I didn't know
again.
that was your first.
It's my first interview. Yeah,
That's amazing.
I was making some terrible videos on my own solo before that interview, but you were my first guest and you agreed to come on despite the dirty accent and me not being known whatsoever. I'm still not known right now, but it was, very different back then.
Yeah.
So
well, you've grown a lot. I mean, obviously, I've watched your work. We've been friends for a few years now, and you've just been doing so much work to build great content for the space. So thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you for the kind words. I'm just trying to learn from the best like you, my friend. Now, speaking about doing a lot for the space.
Yeah.
Before we hit record on the camera right here, Dennis was telling me that he's in talks with 4 different nation states around the world.
Yeah.
About potentially creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Let's jump straight into that. What was the first, maybe tell us a little bit about your journey that's gotten you into this position now, and then we can dive into the specifics a bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, we launched Satoshi Action in June of 2022 with the express intent of going on offense for Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. There's a lot of defensive posturing that was occurring, a lot of attacks that were occurring on Bitcoin. So a lot of people had focused on defending or trying to refute those attacks, trying to fight the FUD, so to speak, which we care about fighting the FUD, but there really wasn't anybody going out there and scoring legislative wins for Bitcoin. And so we set out with a mission to go on offense, to score legislative wins for Bitcoin. And when we did that, we had a lot of success. We started off at the state level fighting for the right to mine. We were able to get that legislation introduced in a number of different states in the first legislative cycle that we worked in 2023. And then we ultimately passed it into law in 2 states. Now we turn right back around to the next legislative cycle, and we were able to repeat that magic. We were able to get more legislation introduced and 2 more bills passed into law. But it went way beyond even just the right to mine. We included the right to self-custody, the right to peer-to-peer transactions, and also the right to run a node, which are critical parts of Bitcoin's ability to function. Beyond that, we're always looking for how we can move forward and pursue even more innovative and cutting-edge policy. And so because of this, the outcome of this election, where we've seen a number of pro-Bitcoin members of Congress get into office, and now we're seeing the removal of the anti-Bitcoin administration and an incoming pro-Bitcoin administration, there's a significant amount of FOMO around Bitcoin policy. So we can move even further into the future. The Overton window has shifted so much so that we can do things like strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation. And we've been the first now in the entire world to be able to introduce this legislation at the state level. And because of the FOMO building and the excitement around it, we're seeing others reach out. And now we officially have 10 states that are looking into copying what happened in Pennsylvania to introduce strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation. But it doesn't stop there. We have 4 state lawmakers, I should say 4 international lawmakers across the world who are also interested in moving forward. And this is just the beginning. I mean, we've been in this thing since the end of the election, right? So November 5th is when the excitement started to really take off. And we're seeing so much FOMO build, so much excitement build around this type of legislation. And we think there's going to be even more federal officials, state officials, and also international lawmakers who are going to get on board with Bitcoin.
It's massive. I want to come back to the international FOMO in a moment. Yeah. But let's talk more about what just happened, because we're filming, November 14th-ish? We're here at Adopting Bitcoin in El Salvador. The Pennsylvania news just happened this week.
That's right.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the bill is proposing to put 10% of the state's treasury into Bitcoin.
Up to 10%. And this is a number that has been passed into law before for precious metals. So what we do at Satoshi Action is we try to pursue legislative victories that already have support behind them, idea support behind them. And that means not trying to go too far outside of the Overton window for lawmakers, because most lawmakers are fairly conservative. And when I say conservative, I don't mean politically conservative. I mean they just are small c conservative. They're very cautious. They don't want to take too big a risk. And so we are always going to pursue legislative outcomes that we think actually align with where lawmakers are at. And so if we tell them, we say, hey, well, this state over here is already doing gold and silver at 10%. Let's just add Bitcoin in there and allow them to do 10% of Bitcoin as well. It makes it seem more reasonable and more likely that we can accomplish that victory. So that is where we are with Pennsylvania. That same model is available on our website at satoshiaction.io, SBR. Lawmakers anywhere in the world can go there and take that model and use it in their own state or their own country.
It's like an open source model.
It's an open source model, absolutely.
Oh, that's incredible. And like you say, getting the foot in the door and, making the idea of putting Bitcoin in the treasury palatable, that's the most important thing. But once the foot's in the door, like you say, the FOMO starts happening. So what were those other states you said that you've been working with? You mentioned, I think, 4, 2 with the right to mine and another 2. What are those other states in America you've been working closely with?
So Montana is one. That was one of the very first ones we passed our right to mine bill in. Arkansas was the other, and Louisiana and Oklahoma are the other 2. Louisiana and Oklahoma have the most cutting edge policy. And so they're the ones that also have the things like right to self-custody, the right to peer-to-peer transactions, the right to run a node. But those are the 4 states that we've been working with. That's
incredible. Massive news. Yeah. You kind of mentioned it. We're just on the back of this Trump victory. Trump's only just won. It's it's very fresh, a couple of weeks old. Things are really moving in lots of different ways, not just the price, but obviously your phone is probably ringing off the tap right now.
I mean, it's not even 2 weeks. It's like 9 days. So it's incredible progress that we've seen. And I think it just bodes well for Bitcoin policy, because for a while, there was a lot of lawmakers that did try to go out on the limb for Bitcoin from a policy perspective at the state level and federally. And there were candidates running, trying to promote it. And it didn't ever seem to be an issue that got them across the finish line. And at times kind of seemed like somewhat of a distraction. But it's clear now that there is enough people who own Bitcoin, who are incentivized enough to engage in the political space, that you can put Bitcoin as a core policy of your campaign and win. And that is really important if we're going to want to see politicians get behind it and support it and pass these bills into law.
And it's happening.
It's happening right in front of our eyes.
It's absolutely incredible to watch. Maybe I'd be really interested if Trump hadn't have won in a hypothetical world. Do you think things would be really different under a Kamala administration?
Oh, sure. I mean, I was telling people before the election, I said, I think if Trump wins and there's a red sweep in Congress, you're going to see a little bit more of an acceleration, I think, in the price of Bitcoin and a little bit more policy movement. But I think regardless, Bitcoin was going to go up. It was so coiled up. It was just waiting for some certainty. So I think we would have seen an acceleration with the Trump win, but we would have seen a slow, gradual increase with the Harris side of things. Now, the one thing I'll say about Democrats is that they're a little bit more cautious around the technology. And I think they care a little bit more about protecting consumers. So they would have been a little more cautious on expanding this door and increasing the ability for crypto writ large to come in. Now, I think the one downside, potentially, of Republicans really sort of being in control, if you had to pick one, is there's just really not going to be as much oversight on the crypto space, which could lead to problems in the future. But I mean, certainly you're going to see just tons of FOMO with Trump in office and with Republicans in the leadership role. They deserve a lot of credit for being the ones to really, I think, be the first ones through the door to pass legislation into law, to advocate for it at the federal level. I mean, all 4 of the states we pass laws in are red states with red governors, with Republican trifectas. Now, that being said, we are seeing a significant amount of movement across the country, not just on the right, but also on the left. And we will be the first in the country to introduce legislation in a Democrat trifecta state with a Democrat introducing it in 2025.
Stay tuned. 2025, we're not far away. Now, something I'm really interested in is I want to know, what do you think have been the biggest catalysts for creating interest amongst these politicians? We obviously had the ETFs launch earlier in the year. A lot of people are saying now that we have Uncle Larry as, Chief Bitcoin Marketing Officer, that's been really good for Bitcoin.
Definitely.
We also have public corporations like MicroStrategy being vindicated and being proven correct that their Bitcoin strategy is revolutionary and is an incredible thing to do. Putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet is something that you should do. If you look at both of those catalysts, which ones do you think have been most meaningful to really open up the possibility of even just the possibility of putting Bitcoin in the treasury for a state? That's massive.
I would have to say the institutions, the BlackRocks, the Fidelities of the world, that really bodes well with lawmakers. When that started to move, I mean, we immediately were putting it in our educational materials and our one-pagers. What we do is oftentimes at Satoshi Action, a lot of organizations, they write these big, huge reports. Nobody reads those things, right? You got these giant reports that talk about strategic Bitcoin reserve or why we should do XYZ with Bitcoin. I have lawmakers that regularly ring me up and text me and say, I'm not reading that. I don't have time for this. So what we do is we condense all of that information into one-pagers. We present those to lawmakers. And it's just much more compelling because, of course, we back it up with facts. You get the little asterisk there. They can go check us to make sure that we're providing accurate information and accurate data. But right away, we were like, $55 billion, practically within the first few weeks has gone into these ETFs. BlackRock, Fidelity, you name it, are getting behind Bitcoin. That really bode well for a lot of people. Additionally, something to be appreciated is the sort of like support that Bitcoin got when we started passing legislation into law. I had multiple people who reached out to me and said, for the first time ever, I'm buying Bitcoin, or my friends are buying Bitcoin because they're seeing these pieces of legislation pass into law. Because they thought, oh, no way, the government's not going to allow this stuff to happen. And so those bills getting passed into law is I think it's a big way to just show that this isn't just something that you and me are going to support as individuals, but state governments are going to get behind it. And now I think, of course, we're going to have some federal legislation get passed as well.
That would be huge. Okay, now I want to come back to the BlackRocks and the pension funds. I've got a couple of more spicy questions we're going to park for the end of today's conversation. I want to talk a little bit more about El Salvador.
Oh, yeah, of course.
How many times have you been here? How long have you been? What's your impressions of Bitcoin country?
It's my first time here. I'm very excited to be in El Salvador. For those of you that are listening in that don't know, my parents have lived here for 15 years. And so it's very exciting to finally come and visit the place that they have been living for the last 15 years. They do a lot of nonprofit work.
In El Salvador?
Yeah, that's right.
I didn't even know that before we hit record. Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah. And so it's been really exciting to come here and see just the level of progress the country has made. Of course, there are parts of the country that are, getting sort of left behind, the more rural parts of the state, the nation. And so I'd love to see more work done here locally to advance policy initiatives that would help to bring the rest of the country forward and to benefit from the opportunity that Bitcoin has to offer. But man, they are just building. They're attracting investment. It is, the crime is like at an all-time low. So the nation really is moving forward, and it's really just going to be about whether or not they can maintain that pace. But it does seem like, for the most part, things are holding together, and the nation really is moving in the right direction. And Bitcoin has certainly played a part in that.
We should interview your dad. I would love to know what El Salvador's been like for 15 years ago. I've only been coming here since early 2022, and each time I come back, I think I've been here 6 or 7 times. Noticeable difference. Like buildings are getting built quicker than any other country I've lived in, and people are just more and more, comfortable. And people actually go outside at night now, which is in early 2022. There's none of that. There wasn't many people in the streets in the dark, and if I was walking home with my bags of groceries after 6 p.m., I was alone. There was nobody else on the streets, and it felt a little bit sketchy. So it's incredible. I don't believe in coincidences, and the fact that your dad's been here for 15 years and you're so in the Bitcoin space, I think that's really interesting.
Both my parents, and even my younger brother and younger sister lived here for about 6 or 7 years also.
Wow.
So
there are no
totally random, but yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting coincidence. Let's talk a little bit more about, I want to pivot and I want to let's come back to 2025. So 2024 is nearly over.
Yeah.
We've had so many big things happen this year. I think people would have been surprised by Donald Trump not only being elected, but his stance on Bitcoin as well. I think surprised me anyway, probably surprised a lot of Bitcoiners. The Bitcoin ETFs were a massive surprise. If you had to throw a dart at a dartboard, we're moving into 2025, typically the most interesting year for Bitcoin. That's the year after the halving. I'm not going to ask you what do you think is going to be the biggest surprise, but what are you paying close attention to for the year of 2025?
For 2025, I think it's really important that we get one of these strategic Bitcoin reserve bills across the finish line. I often tell people, you really got to take advantage of the momentum that you have. There could, very easily in the next 2 to 4 years, there could be a shift politically. I know a lot of people in the middle of all the FOMO and the excitement, they think, sky is the limit, we're just going up. But things can change very rapidly. And so it's important to take advantage of the momentum that you have, try to secure those victories that are in front of you. That means, of course, trying to get SBR language across the finish line. And if we don't get any of it across the finish line in the next year, I think we're going to have to probably wait a lot longer to rebuild that momentum to get something across the finish line. But additionally, I tell people we shouldn't just focus on the big shiny object. Strategic Bitcoin reserve. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody wants to do it. It's a tough policy to get done. So we also need to make sure that we're working on those legislative outcomes that are reasonable, achievable wins. So continuing to pass things like right to mine, the right to self-custody, those are going to be important to advance forward, regardless of where all the shiny objects are, whether that be the federal level or the state level. And so I would love to see for us continue to pass those protections at the state level, but also in Washington, D.C., they really do need to get some of this market reform across the finish line. We need market structures. We need certainty so investors are going to know where to place their investments for the long term. So that's going to be really important. I think a lot of people, again, I love that SBR has taken off and it's a big shiny object, but we have to remember to continue to advance those lesser exciting pieces of policy as well.
Now, I wanted to quickly interrupt today's interview to give a massive shout out to our lead sponsor, Rhino Bitcoin. Rhino is a Bitcoin banking solution that combines traditional financial services with the power of Bitcoin. Created by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners, Rhino offers a range of different services. You can buy Bitcoin, you can sell Bitcoin, you can withdraw straight to cold storage, and you can even pay other people using the Bitcoin Lightning Network. You can also purchase gift cards with sats at the click of a button, and you can even connect a multi-signature setup to Casa, all by using the Rhino application. Additionally, you can even send cash globally to your family and friends using Rhino, and soon you'll be able to pay bills, borrow money against your Bitcoin, and even save Bitcoin for your retirement, all in the one seamless application. You guys can visit rhinobitcoin.com to download Rhino today and experience the future of Bitcoin banking.
There's always a girl in the red dress, as the Matrix says. I think that's a great point. And the point you mentioned about momentum, also a really interesting one. I feel like that 2021 Bitcoin bull market was really cut short. And I think we were potentially on the precipice of seeing a lot of very interesting things before China banned Bitcoin mining in early 2021. So I think you make a great point about momentum. We do need to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. I mean, some people, of course, think we're in a super cycle. I love the idea that we could be in a super cycle that's going to be highly extended. But we just have to assume, we have to assume that that's not going to last for the long haul. And we need to take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of us and just move quickly. And so for us, that's going to be about getting in as many states as possible and raising the money that we need to be able to be successful.
You're taking action while the momentum is on our side. I think that's a great point. And that kind of brings me to another question I've got is like, what can people do? A lot of Bitcoiners say we don't need politics. A lot of people say we can ignore politics. I would love your thoughts about that idea that some Bitcoiners hold and what we should be doing.
Well, you parlayed me, you set me up with a softball for my favorite quote, which is that you can ignore politics, but politics is not going to ignore you. And so people can pretend that they don't need to participate in politics, but ultimately what's going to happen is if we all say, let's stay out of politics, none of us are going to get in politics, let's leave that for other people to do. You're essentially saying, let's leave that for non-Bitcoiners to do, and then non-Bitcoiners are going to be in government doing things that oppose Bitcoin. Like that doesn't make any sense. It's like here in El Salvador, how did El Salvador get to be the #1 place for Bitcoin in the entire world? It was done through the political space. It was done through the political system. So in order for the world to be more like El Salvador, you have to engage. You have to engage politically so that we can move the ball forward. So the biggest thing for us is going to be making sure that we continue to have these conversations and continue to have our engagement with elected officials so that we can have victories for Bitcoin.
Well, I'm sure you're going to be at the forefront of it.
Well, I mean, listen, I did not think that this is where we would be this quickly. When I first started Satoshi Action, it was really out of a place of concern. I was like waking up going, wow, it really looks like we're headed in the wrong direction here. And I was sort of screaming into the internet void for the need for people to become politically active. And I just didn't see anybody doing it the way I thought it needed to be done. And so I jumped into this space because out of just sheer need to protect my own right to access Bitcoin. And ultimately that's led to us being in a position now to pursue some of these really interesting policies like Strategic Bitcoin Reserve.
Yes, that's a great point. You need to, if you want to live in America, you need to actually try to make it a livable place.
Yes, absolutely. You got to engage. And you can do it at the local level, the city level, you can do it at the county level, you can do it at the state level, do it at the federal level. Just find where you can have the most impact. And going back to your question earlier about how people can be helpful, there's a number of different ways that people can engage. One is, they can write letters. We have a big letter writing campaign right now. We were we were able to get over 120,000 letters sent to state lawmakers across the entire country. So that's a huge amount of letters. I mean, that's where we're getting like these lawmakers being like, wow, what is going on?
Were you writing 1,000 of those yourself, or the 120,000 individual people?
So, one of the, I have enough know-how of political technology to not write those letters myself. We have a really great, powerful tool. It's a one-click tool. People can go right to the link, fill in their address. It'll tell you who your lawmakers are. And there's a pre-filled letter there that you can send to say, I support strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation. So that's a very good tool that we have used. But these tools are not free. And us going and advocating for Bitcoin is not free. We have to fly to the States. We have to go to the hearings to testify. We have to meet with lawmakers one-on-one. Sometimes we even have to hire lobbyists. So it's very expensive. So you can write letters. You can participate that way just by making your voice known. But if you really want to have a true impact, Satoshi Action is a bottom-up organization. We do everything we do is 100% from the donations that we get from our supporters. We don't have any mega conference. We don't have any billionaires funding us. So it really is a grassroots effort. I think our average donation is like $80, and we're on our way to be $1 million a year organization. So it's a lot of small donors that are collectively donating together, and that's how we've been able to be successful as an organization.
Yeah, that's the revolution. The little guy stands up, the little guy contributes, the little guy does his part, and eventually, we're fighting for something pretty special here.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Dennis, where can people reach out if they want to find you online?
They can find me on Twitter, Dennis_Porter_. They can reach out to us at help@satoshiaction.io if they want to talk to the team directly. And we'd love to hear from everyone. We try to respond to all of our DMs and emails. It's been a little bit of a busy time, so some things are slipping under the radar, but we see all the letters of support, and we'll certainly try to respond to people if they're interested in working alongside of us.
Firstly, thank you so much for your time today. I've seen you do about 5 different talks and interviews today alone. And thank you so much for what you're doing. I think I've actually been positively surprised at how Bitcoin is being embraced and welcomed in America over the past 2 years. And I think at least some of that is attributed to what you guys are doing at Satoshi Action Fund. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Luke. Appreciate it.